Hey everybody, Akash Inti, your favorite biotech research analyst here today. Today we talk about patient advocacy groups. First off, what they are, why they're important in the healthcare industry, and then lastly, how do they interact and engage with biopharmaceutical manufacturers or drug developers, as that's the focus of this channel. Just a brief note, I want to send an acknowledgement and just have a moment of silence for Evercore ISI analyst Mark Schoenbaum. He was an MD, and he was the top biotech analyst, I think, for 10 years running, number one analyst as ranked by Institutional Investor. Today he had passed away, and so I just wanted to take a moment of silence for him because he's someone that has really impacted and shaped my career in the sense of the way that he went about to be the best in the industry itself, and just the way he carried himself. He had believed that drug development is not just a field that should be so serious and focused, and like, drug development and raising money or financial services should not be so serious and focused. There should be fun with it, and that was one of the things that he really brought to the industry itself. Was he shook things up and added the lightness to it. So just a moment of silence for him. Awesome. Now, with that, so today, as I mentioned, we talk patient advocacy groups. So, first off, what is a patient advocacy group? I think that's a great place to start. And we talked a little bit about this in a previous video. As you may recall, as we talked about the patient themselves, I just at the end of the video talked just briefly about it. Patient advocacy groups are groups of patients that bands together and advocate to Congress, to government in general, for policies that may spur innovation for the treatment or the cure of a disease. Now, patient advocacy groups are so at a high level, that's what they do is it's a group of patients, a patient group that advocates for the patient themselves. One of the big mottos or things that's been spoken about in the industry itself is this idea of patients first or patient centricity. In other words, that anything that happens in healthcare, and this is really in recent times, anything that happens in healthcare should be developed around the patient. Now, it's really nice to hear that in these big meetings and such, but oftentimes you will not see this idea applied in the real world. And this is why we see a lot of issues in terms of healthcare. So, patient advocacy groups are a shot to address this in some ways and really make sure that the patient comes at the forefront of developing new medicines. Now, why are patient advocacy groups important? Well, it's a great question, but the real reason that they're important is because they bring the patient voice to all of the different stakeholder groups, or at least that's what they're attempting to do. And again, it depends on the mission of the patient advocacy groups. Some of them are very focused in addressing government. Others are really focused in addressing clinicians, others scientists, and so on and so forth. So it really depends on the stakeholder group with which they have the most engagement. Yet at the same time, at the end of the day, really what they're looking to do is bring the message of the patients to whomever's developing the drug, whomever's treating and providing healthcare coverage, to whomever is paying for these therapeutics as well, and everyone around along the whole journey itself. So with that, so we talked a little bit about what is a patient advocacy group, why are they important in healthcare. Lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how are patient advocacy groups interacting and interfacing with new drug developers and drug developers specifically, because that's really where we're diving in our focus on is making sure that we collectively are discussing about the role that biopharmaceutical manufacturers play here. So biopharmaceutical manufacturers will really engage patient advocacy groups specifically in rare diseases. So a rare disease, as we may have talked about in a past video, I'm not sure if we have, rare disease is a disease in which there is less than, I believe it's 250,000 or 200,000, between 200 and 250,000 patients and below. It's called a rare disease. Now, as you can imagine, that's not really a large part of the population, but a lot of the times these diseases are absolutely devastating. In other words, the quality of life of a patient might be that they only have a few years to live, and those few years that they do have to live are just really, really maybe in the hospital the whole time. They can't move around. They're always throwing up or something like this. And in other words, the time that they have, the term is called health span. The time that they have and that they're healthy is very short. And so a lot of drug developers have been going after these rare disease populations and applying gene therapies, cell therapies, so on and so forth, some of these newer technologies to these areas because they fit in really well and there seems to be a really good scientific rationale for this. So patient advocacy groups have been engaging a lot of the times, not only the companies and saying, since there's 200,000 patients, it's kind of difficult to find them. It's not like they're all in one area, though it could be. More often than not, they're kind of scattered all throughout the United States, assuming that we're only looking at the US market. And so you might have like 10 patients in one county, another 5 in another county that's right next door, maybe one in the middle of the country or some such thing. So it's again, these patient groups, they're not all in one place, so it's tough to identify them. And that's what these patient advocacy groups will do, is that they'll identify, oh, we have a patient here, we have a patient here, we have a patient here, so that when it comes time to run a clinical trial, uh, the manufacturer can interface and interact with the patient advocacy group and say, hey, we have this new drug that's coming online. We think it's going to work for XYZ disease, rare disease. You guys are the patient advocacy group that's associated with it. We would love to recruit a trial. In other words, get people into this trial. And we know that you have a contact list of people. Would you mind sending out to your patient list? Um, we have this new experimental therapeutic, and so they'll do that, and it's really helpful not only for the drug developer and getting a new cure or a new therapy to the market, but also for the patient advocacy groups in the sense of making sure that their voice is heard by the manufacturer itself, so that maybe some symptom is really not that important to them in terms of treating that symptom. Maybe another one is, let's say, it's not too big of a deal that you're sweating excessively, but the idea that you're throwing up all the time is kind of that's worse. So as a patient, you might prefer a drug that addresses that throwing up, that vomiting a little bit more than it necessarily does the excessive sweating. And again, this is just an example, just off the top of my head, so don't take this literally. But that's the idea: is that the patients can engage with the manufacturer to really develop a drug that like is better overall for the patient themselves. So again, that's today's video. Again, I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe, share if you think this is valuable, or if you think a friend might think this is valuable. And with that, I leave you guys. Remember, keep up, thrive, and stay sexy.